Marhaba and how's it going, everyone? For those who are new to the show, this is Yuwab, a space dedicated to have answers to calm your mind, empowering your workplace, and trust me, eventually it will leave you in a great state of mind to unlock your potential. I'm your host, Saeed Alghafri, and let me just express how much I'm grateful for having you here and you allocating the time to hear me out. Let's ask this question. This is something that most of the people are really not having peace with. When was the last time you made peace with your ego? Yes, your ego. Most of the time, people think that ego gets out of the control, right? Now, just pause and ask a question. Is ego good or bad? I really know that you want to know the answer. And I promise you, and I swear, that I'm going to tell you that by the end of the episode. So just stick around. And before I talk about ego, this is just a personal realization on ego and how it evolved throughout my career. When I was younger, every time I see someone who is with an ego, whom I defined as an ego kind of a person, a negative perception comes. Always just a negative thing. And I'm like, هذا خقاق, شايف عمره, what arrogance, this guy is cocky, what an attitude. Every time when I was young, it comes like that. Now, I think it's a tool and we need it, but we have to really control it. So my journey with ego has been like, the first thing that I've learned is, if you think about ego, not very much ego. First impressions are very important, really. Anything, any interaction you have with your manager, with someone that you meet in the street, always leave a good impression, because it's the most important thing, and this is how people would look at you after that first interaction, especially when you grow in your career. Now, that can be via presentations or preparing a document, or when you're in a meeting, when you're really vocal in a meeting. And sometimes when I look around the meeting room, I could sense that people are like, yeah, Saeed, yeah, you're showing off again. But that's not the case. That's just your character. That's your ego. And every assessment I do, and I think most of the people do today, but since this is a self-reflection, until today, the assessment that I do shows that I have a big, smart pants personality. I've got a big personality. And I remember the first time that I heard that, I'm like, you know what? High five, man. So it was a good thing. And in the same time, I'm also very humble. I honestly didn't know what it means when I started my career. All I knew about being humble is just I need to be good with people, especially when I started. And I really didn't know. And honestly, I didn't know how humble and ego work. But now I do. And you know what really helped me basically define that? The first thing is coaching, whether really coaching people or being coached. And the second thing is empathy. Now, how did really coaching regulated my ego? When I coach people, and I remember when I started learning about coaching, I thought coaching is all about you speaking. But again, at the end of the day, it's more about 80% or 85% of you listening. And then the remaining is asking powerful questions. It's not even you giving advice. So I learned a lot about listening. And people are usually surprised that I don't talk very much when I coach. But again, that's the intention of coaching because it's all about you and not about me. So that taught me how to not really override the other person's character or ego. And while I'm coached, I've been always challenged to ease down. And when my character or ego is floating, I was always told to relax it. Because then when you relax it, other things really surface on the surface. Basically comes to reality. And that's the most important thing. So what I learned, especially when I'm in meetings or doing a presentation, is I read the room very well. That's what happens today compared to what I do in the past. Then I would cultivate, the superpower ego. And then I basically step in and then I would pull it back, test the room again, and adjust based on that. And then I use ego to that extent. Yeah, so that's just a personal reflection on ego and how really it evolves throughout my career. So in this episode, I'm going to leave you with the first thing is what is really ego and why it's misunderstood. Every time people think that ego is bad, but I feel sometimes it's not. And what happens when ego is out of control? The second thing. And sometimes you basically cultivate ego in a specific situation and it really gets the biggest. So when does that happens? And the fourth one is what could go wrong when ego is basically, all over the room? And how can we regulate that? So the first thing is that we're going to go through today is what is really ego and why it is really misunderstood. And in simple terms, ego is your identity and it's your sense of self and it's your confidence. In a simple term, I feel it is very empowering. It's something that you should cultivate, but it's also very destructive when it's not regulated. Why do we need ego? Ego is very much empowering you. It's that sense of motivation in situations and critical moments. You need that motivation. This is when your character is basically floating. If you want to push forward a strategy, an action in a meeting, if you want to push, if you want to have that drive, ego comes very handy from my experience. But again, sometimes when it is out of control, it's very destructive. When does that happen? When you're not present, when you're not in the moment anymore. All right? So then ego becomes very destructive. What happens is that people would look at you as you're arrogant and very selfish, and you don't want that. Let me share with you a story. I fell in love with yoga, and I was told that I'm very flexible and I'm a very good practitioner. I remember in one of the classes, we had to do a handstand, where you stand on your hand. And it's something that I always wanted to do. And at that time, my ego came into action. I wasn't ready at all. I wasn't ready to do it, but I jumped into handstand. And guess what happened? At that time, I fall on my shoulder and I could not practice yoga for 6 months, nor exercise at that time. What happened is that I pushed it, I wasn't ready, and my ego came in place. I wasn't very present. My sense self was like, you can do it, but I wasn't ready for it. And doing a handstand requires conditioning. You have to prepare for it. But I pushed it, and I basically got what I deserved. So I was like, I deserve it. I'm sure some people in the room were like, oh, this guy doesn't really deserve it. Or they were like, oh crap, man. Or they were like, look at him. He was showing off and he deserved it. So you see, ego, when it comes to people, is really misunderstood. And that's because you've got people around you. So if you're by yourself in this world, it's fine. You can do whatever you want. But when people are around, when you're in a situation, when you are in an environment, then your ego is misunderstood. Unless you clarify why, which sometimes when you are in that moment, you can't. So it's usually triggered by the situation. If you are in your present moment, and again, people around you, then the feeling kicks in. And again, thoughts and then actions. Sometimes what I do is, in situations, I explain to people and align why. That's to a smaller audience, specifically when I go to a bigger situation. I explain to them that I'm gonna do that, and my ego will come in place because it's needed, especially in negotiations when we're facing parties which are not within the company. We explain why we want to do it, and it's very important to have that. And I'll explain to you a situation where my ego was not very great in a negotiation session. So the second thing is, what happens when your ego is out of control? Yeah. For me, this is when hell breaks. And it's really not good. Really not good. Specifically because you're not present. Your ego is taking the driver's seat. All right. And you're going to have conflicts. You're going to have kind of a stubbornness moment with everyone. And eventually, you're going to miss opportunities. And that's very important. And worse, if you are basically, let's say that you're trying to receive a feedback or you are in a session, your listening wouldn't be that good, especially when you receive feedback. So it's not going to be that great. You're going to basically not listen. You're just going to basically hear it from here and then it will go from the other ear. And if you are a boss and you are in a meeting and your ego is basically now starting to come, people will be quiet and won't contribute. And you don't want that. You need to find a balance around how to control it and how to basically let it go. The balance is very important and it depends on the situation. The flip side of that is also not good. So, I mean, you can't say no to ego and then let the situation basically float. No, because that would lead into less self-confidence and then sometimes to an insecurity or basically doubt that you can't be it. And then you're going to lose composure in that meeting, specifically in critical moment or crisis. Yeah. So when does ego, the third thing is, when does ego get the biggest, And before I go into that, let me share with you a story. I remember I was in a negotiation session, very tough one, where the other party were in complete fault. So it was not our fault, it was their fault. They defaulted. And now it was about just seeing how can we basically save the day. Because we couldn't walk away, we had to work with them into a situation where it was manageable. The other party were very ready. They knew that we would be vocal. They knew everything. And when we started, our ego was the biggest in the room. And I could sense from the other party, like they were expecting it. And they managed to absorb our ego beautifully. Beautifully. I remember after the meeting, I was like, those guys taught me a lesson. Because our ego flowed. We could not reach any solution from that meeting. It was all shouting and blaming and that. And our ego was like, yeah, who do you think you are? We are da 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 da. And يعني يعني it was a waste of time. يعني we just ended the day without doing anything with them. The next day, I realized that this is what happened. And I should have been much more listening because I missed opportunities over there. So I remember when we met them the next day, it was a much more relaxing tone. Although we had the power and we could go and file a lawsuit, etc. But again, we managed to find a compromise. It wasn't really good. Eventually, it wasn't really what we thought we would have. But again, it was the best compromise for that specific situations because there were elements outside their control and our control at that time. So when I reflect on my story, ego really came because I had the power at that time. Okay. And when that happens, sometimes we undermine the other party, and that's where our ego gets out of control. And when we are recognized, recognition depends if it's a title, if you're a CEO, you are a vice president, you got that recognition or title, you have to be careful around your ego when it comes to that. And sometimes when you're very successful, and I see that from successful entrepreneurship or famous people in newspaper, when you hear them in the newspaper, you see their ego very much surface, and that's not good. They feel, people don't like them eventually. And when there is competition, you also feel like ego start to come because this guy says, oh, this guy is this, I'm that, and I'm this, and the other person. So competition is also are situations when ego really surface. Now imagine you have a really big personality, like me when I did my assessment. What do you think will happen when you are threatened, or when you are really not valued, or you need to basically prove that you are better? And again, even without the big personality thing, what will happen is really not good if you're not really controlling your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, and if your ego would really jump into that situation. Yeah, because eventually you will become someone else, someone that you wouldn't even like after the meeting. And that's what we're going to discuss now in point number 4 is what could really go wrong. Anything in life, and before I go about that, anything in life, we require energy. You need energy for anything in life. Even if you're cultivating that ego, you're going to basically burn a lot of energy during that because you're stressed. Your hormonal system is basically out of control during that time. So during and after, you're going to get tired, you're going to be burnout, and if you have people around you, the relationship wouldn't be that good. So you don't want that. So, and something that I see is, depends on the situation. If you are in a meeting with people, they wouldn't really speak. They would say, why should we speak? This guy has an ego. Let him basically make a decision, and then we're going to move on. So people will not be voicing out. The third thing is, you're going to be protected by a bubble. I remember I saw a movie where I think a boy was in a bubble because his parents wanted to protect him from the world. Because what will happen is you're going to be in a bubble, and then you're not going to welcome any feedback, and you're going to always resist. And the more it is unregulated, the more blind spots you're going to build. And that's not good because blind spots are not really great. Because in difficult situations, you may go into an unpleasant incident, and you don't want that. Your integrity will be touched. Because what will happen is that in situations where people look up to you, and then your ego surfaces, and then it has a negative reaction, it's really not good. Let me share with you a story. This happened to me during one of the moments. So I remember I went to a group of people where I had a chat with them. So I walked into a room. There were quite a good amount of people in the room. So we were like three or four. And one guy, the fifth one, was sitting and he did not join us. Honestly, I felt a bit intimidated during that time because he did not join us. He was sitting and working, and we were talking, enjoying it, and I was looking at him all the time. I reached the point where I went to him and I said, "Why are you not joining us?" And he was like, "Why should I join you? I'm working." I'm like, "Please come join us. It's interesting." He said, "No, I don't want to join you." And you know what happened during that time? My ego started to, fuel. And I said, "Come join us. I mean, it's okay." And then he started shouting at me. And when he shouted, it wasn't really good. It wasn't good. And then people started to come to the room, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable. I was a little bit blind around what's happening. And then it just caught me. I looked around, and it wasn't very pleasant. So what I did is I felt so much of that negative energy in the room, and I had to leave because I knew if I stayed, things wouldn't get that good. And I know that during that time, my integrity was touched and it wasn't very good. So I took myself out and I left the building. Thank God. Because I think at that time, if I couldn't really save myself, things wouldn't go that well. So I'm not really proud of these moments, but I want to share it with you. Now, how can you regulate it? How can you regulate ego? So ego would be there. You will need humility when you talk ego. Really, big time. You need it. And some people view humility as you being weak. Honestly, I feel it's you showing vulnerability. It's really good. And it's very much relieving when I look at it. So you would think of it as it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to admit it. And sometimes it's good to apologize. I remember one time there was a situation that other person had really burst at me to a point that he started shouting and shouting and shouting, and I felt really bad because it was in front of people. So he left. I felt really bad about it, and I went and I apologized. It felt very much relieved. It was like peace with myself. When you do that, ego really is eased out. When you become much more humble, much more cultivating humility, you become ego is really eased out. Because eventually you are a human being and you would start listening and gauging much more better. So the first one is you need humility. The second one is, and this is something that I spoke about, is self-awareness. And I spoke about it in an episode in details. Tune to that and listen to how to basically cultivate self-awareness, because it's very important to understand yourself, because this is when your ego comes, because you would be able to notice when ego is evolved in your body, because you're going to have some sensations, you're going to have feelings, and your mind will be thinking. The third thing is, and this is something that I do with people, check with them. First of all, you need to trust these people. All right? Speak to them and let them hold you accountable. In meetings, they can have signs, whatever, interventions, maybe a feedback after a meeting. Very helpful really to basically regulate ego, in my opinion, because people look at you completely different. And then the last one is coaching and empathy. And I did share with you that my personal experience, and it worked very well with me, because I felt that coaching with an experienced coach, I was able to do that. So what do you think now about ego after hearing me out? Do you think it's good or do you think it's bad? I know I promised you, and honestly, I would answer it. But I feel sometimes my answer wouldn't be liked by people. And, I'm sure now you're like, Saeed, لا تخق, now you're showing an ego to us. But, my answer is, it really depends. And you really cannot eliminate it. But you need to manage it. Ultimately, everything in life has to be managed. That's it for this episode. And I really would love to hear from you in the comments about your ego and what have you experienced when you had that ego moment, and how did you basically come around it, or anything about ego. It's really helpful, and I think it will help most of us. So for now, thanks for tuning in, and please take care of yourself and those who you care about. And if you find this episode beneficial, please share it and subscribe to my channel. You can find me on YouTube and Apple Podcast for now. مع السلامة.